Jake Morrison woke up with his head pounding like someone had hit him with a metal pipe. The last thing he remembered was working in the engine room of the UES Frontier when the alarm started screaming and the whole ship shook like it was being torn apart. Now he was lying on a cold metal floor in a room so white it hurt his eyes. He sat up slowly and looked around. The walls were smooth and seemed to glow with their own light. There was no door that he could see, just solid walls on all sides. The air smelled strange, like metal and something else he could not name. His work clothes were gone, and instead, he wore a gray jumpsuit that was too big for him. Jake was 28 years old and had been working on cargo ships for 6 years. He knew how to fix almost anything that could break on a spaceship. He was not very tall and had brown hair that was always messy. People said he was good at solving problems, but right now he had no idea how to solve this one. A section of the wall suddenly became see-through, and Jake could see into another room. A creature stood there looking at him. It had silver skin that looked like metal and forearms. Its face was long and narrow, with large black eyes. This had to be one of the Solarians he had heard about, but never seen. The creature pressed something, and Jake heard its voice in his head, speaking perfect English. "Human male, you are awake. I am Commander Vexara, warden of this facility. You will listen, and you will understand." Jake stood up and walked closer to the wall. "Where am I, and what happened to my ship?" "Your vessel was captured while carrying illegal weapons through Zalarian space. You are now a prisoner on Kalok Station. This is a maximum security prison for the most dangerous criminals in this part of the galaxy. I don't know anything about illegal weapons. I just fix engines." Commander Vexara's forearms moved in, what might have been the alien version of a shrug. "That is not my concern. You are here now, and you will remain here. What interests me is that you are a human male. We have never had one in this facility before." "What do you mean by that?" "This prison houses only female criminals from many different species. Human males are considered weak by most galactic civilizations. They usually do not survive long in environments like this. You are an experiment of sorts." Jake felt his stomach drop. "How many prisoners are here?" "Over 3,000. They come from 47 different species. Each species has its own ways of establishing dominance and control. The strong rule the weak here, as it should be." The wall became solid again, and Jake was alone. He sat down on the floor and tried to think. His ship was gone, probably destroyed. His crewmates were either dead or captured like him. He was trapped in a prison full of alien criminals who would probably try to kill him the moment they saw him. Hours passed before the wall opened again. This time it was a real opening, and 2 guards walked in. They looked like Commander Vexara, but were smaller and carried weapons that hummed with energy. They did not speak, but pointed for Jake to follow them. They walked through corridors that seemed to go on forever. The walls were the same glowing white as his cell. Jake saw other prisoners through transparent sections of wall. Most of them looked nothing like humans. Some had scales, others had fur or skin that changed colors. Many had extra arms or legs, or heads. All of them stopped what they were doing to stare at Jake. As he passed, finally they reached a large open area that must have been hundreds of meters across. The ceiling was so high Jake could barely see it. Thousands of alien prisoners moved around in groups. The noise was incredible. Voices in languages Jake had never heard, mixed with sounds that might have been music or fighting or both. The guards pushed Jake forward and left him standing alone at the edge of this chaos. Within seconds he was surrounded by creatures that towered over him. The closest one had blue skin covered in spikes and teeth that looked like they could bite through metal. "What is this tiny thing?" the blue creature said, in words that Jake somehow understood. It looked so weak and soft. Another prisoner, this one covered in black fur with 6 arms, reached out to touch Jake's face. I have never seen this kind before. Its skin is so smooth. More prisoners gathered around. Jake realized they were all female, though it was hard to tell with some of the more alien-looking ones. They poked at him and made comments about how strange he looked. Some seemed curious. Others looked hungry in a way that made Jake very nervous. A loud roar silenced the crowd. The prisoners moved aside, and Jake saw the source of the sound. A creature that looked like it was made of living rock stomped toward him. It was easily 3 meters tall, and its arms were thick as tree trunks. This had to be one of the Krillians he had read about. I am Zarakith, the rock creature announced. I lead the strong ones here. You, little soft thing, will serve us or you will be crushed. Before Jake could answer, another voice spoke from behind the crowd. The human is under my protection. The prisoners parted again, and Jake saw something that looked almost human, except for the pale skin and completely black eyes. I am Lysianel of the Mentory. This one's mind is different. Interesting, Zarakith growled. The humans belong to no one yet, mind which. If it wants protection, it must earn it. A third voice joined the conversation. Perhaps we should see what it can do before we decide its fate. This speaker looked more human than the others, with green skin and normal-looking eyes. I am Quindar. I lead those who understand technology here. Jake found himself in the middle of what was clearly a power struggle between 3 different groups. The prisoners around him were taking sides, moving to stand behind one of the 3 leaders. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. I don't want to cause any trouble, Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. I just want to survive. Zarakith laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. Survival here requires strength, little human. Show us your strength or become food for the strong. Lysianel tilted her head as if listening to something only. She could hear. His thoughts are not like ours. There is something different about human minds. Quindar studied Jake with calculating eyes. You worked on ships, yes? You understand machines? Jake nodded. I'm an engineer. I fix things. Then perhaps you will be useful after all. But usefulness alone will not keep you alive here. You must choose who to serve. The 3 leaders waited for his answer, while thousands of prisoners watched. Jake looked at each of them and realized that choosing wrong would mean death. But maybe choosing it all would mean death, too. In the distance, he could hear the hum of machinery that kept this massive station running. Somewhere in all that noise might be his chance to survive. He took a deep breath and made the choice that would change everything. I choose none of you, Jake said quietly but clearly. The massive room fell silent. Even the background noise of the prison seemed to stop. Zarakith's rocky face twisted into what might have been surprise or anger. Lysianel's black eyes widened. Slightly, Quindar just smiled. Foolish human, Zarakith growled. You have chosen death. But Jake was not finished talking. I choose to help everyone. This station has problems that need fixing. I can fix them. When I do, everyone benefits. The prisoners began to laugh and make mocking sounds. Some called him stupid. Others said he would be dead before the day ended. But Jake noticed that the 3 leaders were not laughing. They were thinking. Over the next few days, Jake learned how the prison really worked. The strong took what they wanted from the weak. Food, sleeping spaces, even basic supplies were controlled by whoever could fight the best. The guards only cared about keeping prisoners from escaping. They did not care if prisoners hurt or killed each other. Jake was given a small sleeping space in a corridor that no one else wanted. It was near some kind of machinery that made noise all night. Most prisoners would have seen this as punishment, but Jake was happy to be close to the machines. He spent his first few nights listening to the sounds and figuring out what each machine did. On his fourth day, Jake noticed that the water coming from the drinking stations tasted terrible and barely flowed. Other prisoners complained, but did nothing about it. Jake followed the pipes through maintenance tunnels that were too small for most of the larger aliens to enter. He found the water treatment plant deep in the station's lower levels. The machines were old and poorly maintained. Filters were clogged with years of buildup. Pumps were running at half power because no one had cleaned them. Jake had seen similar systems on cargo ships and knew exactly what to do. It took him 3 days of careful work to clean and repair the water system. He had to sneak parts from other machines and work when the guards were not watching. When he was finished, clean water flowed freely from every station in the prison. The change was immediate. Prisoners who had been drinking dirty water for months suddenly had all they wanted of clean, fresh water. They did not know who had fixed it, but they were grateful. Jake did not tell anyone it was him. Word spread quickly through the prison that someone had fixed the water. The 3 faction leaders began asking questions. Their followers searched for whoever was responsible. Jake kept quiet and watched. A week later, Jake tackled another problem. The air in certain sections of the prison was stale and hard to breathe. Following air ducts through more maintenance tunnels, he found circulation fans that had stopped working. Again, it was just a matter of cleaning and basic repairs. Fresh air began flowing through areas that had been stuffy for years. Prisoners who lived in those sections felt better and could sleep more easily. Again, no one knew who was responsible. But the improvement was obvious to everyone. By his 3rd week in prison, Jake had quietly fixed dozens of small problems. Lights that had been dim became bright. Food dispensers that had broken down started working again. Even the temperature in different sections became more comfortable. The prisoners began to notice that their living conditions were getting better. Some thought the guards were finally doing maintenance. Others believed it was some kind of miracle. The 3 faction leaders knew it was neither. Zarakith was the first to figure it out. She caught Jake crawling out of a maintenance tunnel after fixing a waste disposal unit. Instead of crushing him as she had threatened, she studied him with interest. "You are the one making improvements," she said. It was not a question. Jake nodded. There was no point in lying. "Why do you not claim credit? Why do you not demand payment or protection?" "Because that would make it about me instead of about helping people. If everyone benefits, everyone is safer and happier. That includes..." Zarakith was quiet for a long time. In her warrior culture, everything was about proving strength and dominance. Jake's approach made no sense to her, but she could not argue with the results. Lysianel found Jake next. She had been using her psychic abilities to search for the mystery repair person. When she touched his mind, she found something she had never encountered before. "Your thoughts are very organized," she told him. "Most beings think in chaos, with emotions and fears mixed together. Your mind is like a machine, focused on solving problems. I just tried to think through each step before." "I do it," Jake explained. "If you understand how something works, you can usually fix it when it breaks. You think the same way about people as you do about machines." Jake considered this. People have problems too. Usually those problems come from not having what they need or being afraid of losing what they have. Fix those problems, and people get along better. Quindar was the last to approach Jake directly. She had been watching him work and was impressed by his technical skills. More importantly, she recognized something that the others had missed. "You are changing the balance of power in this prison," she said. "Not through force, but by making force less necessary." "I hadn't thought about it that way," Jake replied. "I just fix what's broken. When people are not fighting over basic needs, they fight less overall." When they fight less, the strong do not need to prove their strength. As often, you are making us all more civilized without anyone realizing it. Jake had not planned any of this, but he could see that Quindar was right. Prisoners were still divided into factions, but there was less tension between them. With clean water, fresh air, and working facilities, there was less to fight about. Commander. Vexara noticed the changes too. Reports of violence in the prison had dropped significantly. Prisoners seemed more content and caused fewer problems for the guards. She could not understand what had changed, but she was not complaining. During his daily rounds through the prison, Jake observed how different species interacted. The Krillians valued physical strength above all else. The Menthari worked together through psychic connections. The Vorthans used technology to solve every problem. Each group thought their way was the only correct way. But Jake saw that each approach had value. Krillian strength was useful for moving heavy equipment. Menthari. Mental links could coordinate complex tasks. Vorthan technology could monitor and control systems. If these groups worked together instead of against each other, they could accomplish amazing things. Jake began to plan bigger projects that would require cooperation between the factions. He started small, asking individual prisoners from different groups to help with repairs that needed multiple skills. A Krillian to lift heavy parts, a Menthari to sense problems in hard-to-reach places, a Vothan to program control systems. At first, members of different factions were suspicious of working together. But when they saw the results of their cooperation, they began to understand Jake's approach. Problems that had seemed impossible to solve became manageable when different groups combined their abilities. The prison was changing, and Jake was at the center of that change. But change was dangerous in a place built on tradition and established power structures. Not everyone was happy with what Jake was doing. Some prisoners preferred the old ways, where strength determined everything. Some guards worried that cooperation between factions might lead to organized rebellion. Jake knew that his approach was working, but he also knew it was risky. He was walking a fine line between helping people and disrupting the order that kept the prison stable. One wrong step could destroy everything he had built and probably get him killed in the process. But for the first time since arriving at Kalok Station, Jake felt like he had a purpose and a plan. He was not just surviving anymore. He was building something better. Jake was working on a broken food dispenser when the lights started flickering. At first, he thought it was just a power fluctuation, something he had seen many times on cargo ships. But then the lights went completely dark for several seconds, before coming back on dimmer than before. All around the prison, conversation stopped as prisoners looked up at the failing lights. Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. He had learned enough about Kalok Station to know that power problems this severe meant something was very wrong with the main reactor. Emergency alarms began blaring throughout the station. The sound was so loud it hurt to hear. Red lights flashed in patterns that Jake did not recognize, but the message was clear. This was serious. Commander Vexara's voice echoed through every speaker in the prison. All prisoners returned to designated areas immediately. This facility is experiencing technical difficulties. Remain calm and follow guard instructions. But the prisoners were not calm. Jake could see fear in their faces, even among the strongest fighters. Everyone knew that if the station's power failed completely, life support would fail too. In the cold of space, they would all die together. Jake made his way through corridors filled with nervous aliens toward the central area where prisoners gathered. The three faction leaders were already there, arguing loudly while their followers watched with growing panic. "We must take control of the guard stations," Zarakith was saying. "If this station is dying, we need access to escape pods." "There are not enough escape pods for everyone," Quindar replied. We need to understand what is happening before we do anything rash. Lysianel stood apart from the others, her black eyes closed in concentration. I can sense fear from the guards. 2. They do not know how to fix this problem either. Jake pushed through the crowd until he was close enough to hear everything. The lights flickered again, staying dark for almost 10 seconds this time. When they came back on, they were even dimmer. The reactor is failing, Jake said loudly enough for everyone to hear. The 3 leaders turned to look at him. Zaraketh growled low in her throat. What do you know of reactors, soft human? I know that power fluctuations like this mean the reactor core is becoming unstable. If it keeps getting worse, it will either shut down completely or explode. Either way, we all die. More prisoners gathered around to listen. Jake could see the fear in their faces growing stronger. Quindar stepped closer to Jake. You have worked on reactor systems before? Smaller ones on cargo ships, but the principles are the same. The problem is that Kalok Station uses technology from dozens of different species, all connected together. When something goes wrong, it affects everything else in ways that are hard to predict. As if to prove his point, the artificial gravity suddenly became lighter for a few seconds before returning to normal. Several prisoners stumbled as their weight changed unexpectedly. How long do we have? Lysianel asked. Jake looked up at the lights, which were now flickering constantly. If I had to guess, maybe 2 or 3 days before complete failure. But I could be wrong. It might happen faster. The crowd of prisoners began to panic. Voices rose in dozens of languages as aliens from different species argued about what to do. Some wanted to fight the guards and take control of the station. Others wanted to hide and hope someone else would fix the problem. Over the noise, Jake heard new alarms sounding. These were different from the first ones, deeper and more urgent. Then Commander Vexara's voice returned to the speakers. Attention, all personnel. We have experienced a cascade failure in the main reactor core. Automated repair systems are not responding. All technical personnel report to reactor control immediately. Jake felt his stomach drop. Cascade failure was the worst possible situation for a reactor. It meant that one system failure was causing other systems to fail, which caused even more systems to fail. Without immediate action, the entire reactor would destroy itself. I have to try to help, Jake said to the 3 leaders. Zaraketh laughed harshly. The guards will never let a prisoner near the reactor. They would rather die than trust us. Then we all die anyway, Jake replied. But maybe if I can convince them that I know what I'm doing, they'll let me try. Quindar was studying Jake with her calculating green eyes. You really think you can fix a reactor that their own technicians cannot repair? I don't know, but I have to try. The worst that happens is I fail, and we all die, which is what will happen anyway if no one does anything. The lights went out. Again, this time for almost 30 seconds. When they came back on, they were so dim that Jake could barely see the faces around him. The gravity fluctuated again, and somewhere in the distance he could hear the sound of metal creaking under stress. Even if the guards let you try, Lysianel said, this kind of repair would require many people working together. The reactor. Systems are spread throughout the station. Jake nodded. That's why I need all 3 factions to help. Krillians are strong enough to work in the high radiation areas near the core. Menthari can coordinate timing through mental links when normal communication fails. Vorthans understand the computer systems that control everything. The 3 leaders looked at each other. Jake could see them thinking, weighing their options. Around them, thousands of prisoners waited to hear what would happen next. My people do not work with outsiders, Zaraketh said finally. It is not our way. Your way will not matter if we are all dead, Jake replied. This is bigger than faction politics. This is about survival. Quindar spoke next. The technical challenges alone would be enormous. We would need to coordinate hundreds of people doing different tasks at exactly the right times. Which is why we need mental links to keep everyone connected, Jake said, looking at Lysianel. She was quiet for a long moment, her black eyes staring at something only she could see. The risk is great. If we fail, we will likely die in the attempt. But if we do nothing, death is certain. The station shuddered around them, a deep vibration that Jake felt in his bones. More alarms began sounding, these ones even more urgent than before. In the distance, he could hear guards shouting orders in their own language. "We don't have time to debate this," Jake said urgently. "Every minute we wait makes the problem worse. Either we try to work together, or we all die separately." Zarakith looked around at her followers, then at the flickering lights above. Her warrior instincts told her to fight, but there was nothing to fight here except physics and engineering. "If we do this," she said slowly, "I lead my people. You do not command warriors." "I wouldn't know how to command warriors," Jake agreed. "I can only tell you what needs to be done and where. How you organize your people is up to you." Quindar nodded reluctantly. "The same for my technicians. We will work with you, but we maintain control over our own operations." Lysianel was the last to agree. "My people will provide coordination, but we will not risk our minds unnecessarily. Mental links over such distances are dangerous." Jake felt a mixture of hope and terror. These three groups had never worked together on anything. Their species had been enemies for generations. The technical challenges were enormous, even with perfect cooperation. And they had maybe 2 days to accomplish something that should take weeks of careful planning, but it was better than waiting to die. "Then let's go save this station," Jake said. The first step was convincing Commander Vex Ara to let prisoners near the reactor. That was going to be the hardest part of all. Getting to see Commander Vex Ara was almost impossible under normal circumstances. Getting to see her during a reactor crisis while being a prisoner was completely insane. But Jake had no choice except to try. The 3 faction leaders agreed to escort Jake to the guard station, which was the only way he would not be shot on sight by nervous guards. Even with their protection, the Zelarian guards pointed weapons at them and shouted warnings in their harsh language. "I need to speak to Commander Vex Ara immediately," Jake called out. "I can help fix the reactor." One of the guards laughed and said something that Jake was sure was not polite. But another guard, one with silver markings on her uniform that indicated higher rank, looked at Jake with interest. "You are the human who has been repairing things throughout the station," she said. "I am Lieutenant Kashira. The commander has been wondering about you." Jake felt a small surge of hope. "Then? I understand how the station's systems work. The reactor crisis requires immediate action, and I have a plan." Lieutenant Kashira studied Jake for a long moment, then spoke quickly into a communication device. After a brief conversation in the Zelarian language, she nodded reluctantly. "The commander will see you. But if this is some kind of escape attempt, you will be executed immediately." They were escorted through corridors Jake had never seen before, past sophisticated security systems and guard posts. Finally, they reached a control room filled with screens and blinking lights. Commander Vex Ara stood in the center, her 4 arms working at different control panels simultaneously. When she saw Jake, her large black eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Explain quickly why a prisoner thinks he can solve problems that trained technicians cannot." Jake took a deep breath. "Because your technicians are specialists in Zelarian technology. This station uses systems from dozens of different species, all connected in ways that were never meant to work together. I've been studying those connections for weeks." On the screens around them, Jake could see readouts showing the reactor's condition. It was worse than he had feared. Multiple cooling, Systems were failing, containment fields were fluctuating wildly, and the fuel mixture was becoming unstable. "What do you propose?" Commander Vexara asked. Jake moved to one of the displays and began pointing to different systems. "The cascade failure started here, in the primary cooling loop. But it's spreading because the backup systems can't handle the load. We need teams working simultaneously at 17 different locations throughout the station." "Impossible. We do not have enough trained personnel." "But I do. The prisoners include experts in every type of technology used on this station. Krillians can work in the high radiation areas that are too dangerous for others. Menthari can provide mental coordination when normal communications fail. Vorthans understand computer systems better than anyone." Lieutenant Keshira stepped forward. "Commander, you cannot seriously consider allowing prisoners access to critical systems. This could be an elaborate escape plan." "Where would we escape to?" Jake asked. "We're in the middle of space on a station that's about to explode. If this doesn't work, we all die together." Commander Vexara was quiet for almost a minute, studying the displays that showed the reactor's declining condition. Finally, she spoke. "Show me your plan in detail. If I think it has any chance of success, I will consider it." Jake spent the next hour explaining exactly what needed to be done at each location and why. He showed how the different alien technologies could work together if properly coordinated. Most importantly, he explained how the prisoner factions could contribute their unique abilities to the repair effort. "The plan is theoretically sound," Commander Vexara admitted, "but it requires precise timing and perfect cooperation between groups that have never worked together. The margin for error is virtually zero." "Which is why we need to start immediately," Jake replied. "Every minute we delay makes success less likely." After another long pause, Commander Vexara made her decision. "Very well. You will have access to the necessary areas, but under heavy guard. If any prisoner attempts to use this crisis for escape or sabotage, all cooperation ends immediately." Lieutenant Keshira looked shocked. "Commander, I must protest this decision. The security implications are enormous." "So is the alternative," Commander Vexara replied coldly. "Would you prefer to die maintaining proper protocol?" The next 18 hours were the most intense of Jake's life. Teams of prisoners spread throughout the station, each group working on critical repairs while guards watched their every move. Jake coordinated everything from the main control room with communication links to each team. The Krillians proved their worth immediately. Areas near the reactor core were flooded with radiation that would kill most species within minutes, but Krillian warriors could work there for hours with minimal protection. Zaraketh herself led the most dangerous missions, lifting massive reactor components that machines could not move. The Menthari mental network became the backbone of coordination. When normal communications failed due to interference from the damaged reactor, Lysianel and her followers maintained psychic links between all the teams. They could relay complex technical information instantly across the entire station. Vorthans tackled the computer systems that controlled everything. Quindar's people worked their way through thousands of lines of code, finding and fixing software problems that the station's automated systems could not handle. But the work was dangerous in ways Jake had not anticipated. 3 Krillians died from radiation poisoning when a containment field failed unexpectedly. A team of Vorthans was trapped in a collapsing maintenance tunnel when structural supports gave way. 2 Menthari suffered severe mental damage when they tried to maintain psychic links over too great a distance. Each death hit Jake hard. These beings were dying because of his plan, following his orders. But stopping now would mean everyone died. So he forced himself to keep going. Lieutenant Keshira made everything worse by actively working against the repair efforts. She believed that Jake was manipulating the crisis for his own purposes, and that the prisoners could not be trusted. She assigned guards to interfere with prisoner work teams and restricted access to critical areas. "You're sabotaging our only chance of survival," Jake told her during one heated argument in the control room. "I'm protecting this station from prisoner exploitation," she replied. "I will not allow criminals to gain control of our most sensitive systems. The criminals are the only ones keeping us alive right now." Commander Vexara was caught between her duty to maintain security and her growing realization that Jake's plan was working. The reactor had stabilized somewhat, and several critical systems were back online. But Lieutenant Kashira's interference was slowing progress and creating dangerous delays. The crisis reached its peak when Zaraketh was injured while manually adjusting fuel rods in the reactor core. The massive Krillian had been exposed to lethal levels of radiation and was dying. Her followers wanted to abandon the mission to carry her to safety, which would have doomed the entire repair effort. Jake made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He left the control room and went to the reactor core, where Zaraketh lay unconscious among her warriors. "I'll finish the fuel rod adjustment," he told them. "Get her to medical treatment." The Krillians stared at him in amazement. Jake was risking his life to save their leader, something that made no sense in their warrior culture. Enemies did not sacrifice themselves for each other. "You will die from the radiation," one of the warriors protested. "Maybe, but if I don't try, we all die for certain." Jake spent 47 minutes in the reactor core, manually adjusting fuel rods while radiation flooded his body. By the time he finished, he could barely stand, and his skin was already showing signs of radiation burns. But the fuel mixture was stable again. The Krillians carried both Jake and their injured leader to the medical bay. Word of Jake's sacrifice spread quickly through the prisoner communication network. The human who had asked for nothing and given everything had proven himself in the most dramatic way possible. The gesture changed everything. Prisoners who had been reluctant to cooperate threw themselves into the repair work with new determination. The three faction leaders stopped arguing about territory and focused completely on saving the station. Even some of the guards began to see Jake as something other than just another criminal. But Lieutenant Kashira was not impressed. If anything, Jake's heroic gesture made her more suspicious. She was convinced that this was all part of some elaborate manipulation, and she was determined to stop it before Jake gained too much influence over the prisoners. She began planning her own action against the human, who was changing everything she thought she understood about prison management. Jake woke up in the medical bay with his skin feeling like it was on fire. The radiation exposure had been severe, but Zilarian medical technology was more advanced than anything humans had developed. He would survive, though he would always carry scars from his time in the reactor core. Zaraketh was in the bed next to him, her rocky skin now showing patches of different colors where radiation had damaged her natural armor. She was awake and watching him with something that might have been respect. "You saved my life," she said simply. "In my culture, this creates a debt that can never be repaid." Jake tried to sit up, but the movement sent waves of pain through his body. "I didn't do it to create a debt. I did it because it was necessary. That makes it even more significant. You risked death for someone who had threatened to kill you when we first met. This kind of honor is rare among any species." Through the medical bay windows, Jake could see that the lights in the corridor were steady and bright. The reactor crisis was over. His plan had worked, and the station was stable again. Commander Vexara entered the medical bay with several guards, including Lieutenant Kashira. The commander's 4 arms carried data tablets and official documents. "The reactor is fully operational," she announced. "Your repair plan succeeded. Kalok Station is no longer in danger." Jake felt a surge of relief. What about casualties? 12 prisoners died during the repair operations. 23 others were seriously injured. These losses are regrettable, but they are far fewer than the 3,000 who would have died if the reactor had failed. Lieutenant Kishira stepped forward, her expression hostile. Commander, I must file a formal protest about allowing prisoners access to critical systems. This sets a dangerous precedent. The precedent has already been set, Commander Vexara replied calmly. These prisoners saved this station when our own technicians could not. That changes everything. Jake could see that something fundamental had shifted in the commander's thinking. The crisis had forced her to see prisoners as individuals with valuable skills rather than just criminals to be contained. Over the following weeks, Jake recovered from his radiation exposure while the prison slowly transformed around him. The cooperation that had developed during the crisis did not disappear when the emergency ended. Prisoners who had worked together on the repairs continued to collaborate on smaller projects. Commander, Vexara called Jake to her office when he was finally released from medical care. The office was sparse and functional, with screens showing every part of the prison complex. I have been thinking about what happened during the crisis, she said. Your methods achieved something I thought was impossible. 3 enemy factions worked together successfully. Violence between prisoners decreased significantly. Overall efficiency improved dramatically. Jake nodded. When people have a common goal and the tools to achieve it, they usually find ways to cooperate. I am creating a new position in this facility, Prisoner Liaison. Your job will be to mediate disputes between factions and organize work projects that benefit the entire prison population. Jake was surprised. You're giving me official authority? Limited authority, yes. You will report directly to me, and you will have access to all non-security areas of the station. You will also have the right to request specific prisoners for work assignments, regardless of their faction affiliations. Lieutenant Kishira looked shocked. Commander, this is completely against protocol. Prisoners cannot be given administrative positions. Protocol nearly killed us all, Commander Vexara replied. This human's unconventional approach saved 3,000 lives. I think we can afford to be unconventional in return. Jake's new role was unlike anything that had ever existed in a galactic prison. He spent his days moving between different groups, listening to complaints, and finding solutions that worked for everyone. Instead of using force to maintain order, he used logic and mutual benefit. The first major test came when a dispute arose between Krillian and Vorthan prisoners over access to the exercise facilities. Traditionally, such conflicts were resolved through combat, with the winners taking control of the disputed area. Instead, Jake proposed a scheduling system where different groups had access at different times. He also suggested modifications to the facilities that would make them suitable for the exercise needs of different species. The Krillians could have their strength training during certain hours, while the Vorthans could use the space for their technical training projects at other times. The solution worked so well that other groups requested similar arrangements for shared spaces throughout the prison. Jake found himself managing an increasingly complex schedule that maximized the use of every facility while minimizing conflicts. Lysiano approached Jake with a different kind of problem. The Menthuri prisoners were suffering from mental isolation because their psychic abilities were limited by the prison's security systems. They needed mental contact with their own kind to maintain psychological health. Jake worked with Quindar's technicians to modify the security systems in ways that allowed controlled psychic contact without compromising prison security. Menthuri could maintain their mental connections while still preventing them from coordinating escape attempts. Within months, violence in Kalok Station had dropped to the lowest levels in its history. Prisoners were no longer focused primarily on fighting each other for basic resources. Instead, they were contributing their skills to maintain and improve the facility that housed them all. The three faction leaders found their roles changing. As well, Zaraketh still commanded respect among the Krillians, but her focus shifted from leading raids against other factions to organizing her people for construction and maintenance projects. Lysianel used her psychic abilities to coordinate complex operations rather than to spy on enemies. Quindar's technical expertise became essential for upgrading prison systems, rather than just maintaining weapons. Not everyone was happy with the changes. Some prisoners preferred the old system, where strength determined everything. They felt that cooperation made them weak, and that conflict was natural and necessary. Lieutenant Kashira led the opposition among the guards. She believed that the new system was making prisoners too comfortable, and that Jake's influence was dangerous to prison security. "You are creating a situation where prisoners have too much power," she told Commander Vexara during one heated discussion. "Eventually they will use this power against us." "They already had power," the commander replied. "The power to make this facility ungovernable through constant violence and conflict. Now they are using that same power to make the facility better for everyone." The real test of Jake's system came when a new transport arrived with fresh prisoners. Among them were several high-ranking criminals from species that had never been housed at Kalok Station before. One of the new arrivals was a being called Vexran, a member of a warrior species known for their aggression and refusal to cooperate with other races. Vexran was nearly as large as Zaraketh, but moved with deadly grace that suggested advanced combat training. Within hours of arrival, Vexran had challenged the authority of all three faction leaders and declared his intention to establish dominance through traditional combat. Several other new prisoners rallied to his cause, seeing an opportunity to return to the old ways. Jake found himself facing the biggest threat to the stability he had worked so hard to create. If Vexran succeeded in starting a war between factions, months of progress would be destroyed in days. But Jake was no longer the frightened cargo ship engineer who had arrived at Kalok Station. He had learned how to navigate alien politics and had earned the respect of some of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. "You want to prove your strength," Jake told Vexran during their first meeting. "I challenge you to prove it by accomplishing something that benefits everyone, not just yourself." Vexran laughed, a sound like metal grinding against stone. Soft human words. "I prove strength through combat, not through serving others." "Then you're weaker than I thought," Jake replied calmly. "Anyone can destroy things. It takes real strength to build something better." The confrontation that followed would determine whether Jake's vision of cooperative prison management could survive, or whether Kalok Station would return to the brutal chaos that had defined it for so many years. Jake looked around at the thousands of prisoners watching this exchange and realized that he was no longer just surviving in this place. He had become its heart, the center around which a new kind of order had formed. The scared engineer was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true leadership meant making everyone stronger, not just yourself. The future of Kalok Station, and perhaps the future of how different species could coexist throughout the galaxy, would be decided by what happened next.